So we're talking palm kernel today and the dairy industry. So it encompasses deforestation and dairy farm intensity, and there's strong opinions on both of those. So I'll give you the arguments for and against palm kernel, and then at the end I'll give you the happy cow view on palm kernel. So palm trees grow in tropical areas around the equator, and the fruit of the palm tree produces palm oil, and palm oil is used in so many products around the world. It's estimated about 50% of supermarket products contain some palm oil in them. And the reason palm oil is used is that it has no odor, has no taste, and it's sort of semi-solid at room temperature. So it's used as a thickener. It gives foods texture. Palm kernel is the husk that goes around the palm fruit, and during processing it's discarded, and it used to be thrown away or burnt. And in the last 15 years, New Zealand dairy farmers have been importing it and feeding it to cows because it has some nutritional value. Now, it's important to note that an Indonesian farmer decides to grow palm trees because they sell the oil for human consumption. That's where the money is. That's what they make their decisions based on. They don't make it based on the fact that the byproduct, the husk, will be sold to New Zealand dairy farmers. So if New Zealand banned palm kernel, it would have absolutely no impact on the amount of palm trees that are planted. Now, having said that, there's two schools of thought here. The pro-palm kernel view is that palm kernel is going to be there whether we buy it or not. If we don't buy it, it'll be discarded. We may as well buy it and use it. The anti-palm kernel view is that we shouldn't be involved with any sort of industry that is involved with deforestation, adverse environmental impacts, and we certainly don't want to be involved with anything that is encouraging the New Zealand dairy industry to become more intensive. Now, it's natural we don't want to be encouraging something or be buying a product that we don't agree with the way it's produced. The pro-palm kernel people would say that that standard is a much too high a bar, and that if you're going to hold that standard, you have to apply it to all other products. And they would say, look at soybeans. Soybeans as a crop globally probably has far more environmental impacts than the palm oil crop, far more deforestation, particularly in the Amazon. And if we look at North America, you see soybeans are responsible for all sorts of nitrification of the Mississippi, which then goes down into the Gulf of Mexico and all sorts of other aspects. And they'll point out that only 40% of the soybean is consumed by humans. The rest is discarded or fed to animals, because soybeans have a husk, and when you take that husk off, it's called soy hulls, and you feed it to animals, has the same nutritional value as palm kernel. And they'll say that, you know, where is the moral outrage around the soybean product and soy hulls? And their real point is that if you're going to be morally concerned about the palm oil industry, we'll apply that to soybeans, and you probably have to apply that to corn as well. And before you know it, you go to the supermarket and there's nothing you can eat. Now, at Happy Cow Milk, we can sort of understand both sides of this argument. Many of our supporters will buy our product because they want a more ethical, sustainable dairy and won't buy traditional dairy. And then also, being a dairy farmer, we know how difficult it is to consistently produce a product. And what this really comes to, the two views are, the pro-palm kernel people will say, listen, it's just too high a standard to set to say that we only buy a product if everything is perfect the way we want it. The anti-palm kernel people would sort of say, well, we should be able to live in a world where we only buy products that are doing good for the world. And if we don't have that standard, the world will never change. Experience will show that these two sides will never find common ground, as I said before. So let's move on to, does palm kernel affect the intensification of dairy in New Zealand? Right, since 1990, the dairy industry has seen some big changes. We've seen an extra 2 million cows added to farms in New Zealand. Each cow produces around 50% more milk than it did in 1990. Cows eat more grass than they did, or feed, and farmers grow more feed. One of the biggest things is we've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of supplementary feed fed to cows. This graph shows that in 1990 we fed 150 kgs of dry matter per cow per year. Today it's around 800, so that's a 400% increase roughly. But if we look at this graph, we see the grey there, that is palm kernel. So palm kernel became a significant feed around 2007. The next light grey is maize, and then we have the light blue, which is fodder beet. So you could roughly say that since 1990 we're now starting to feed palm kernel, maize silage and fodder beet to cows. So is this palm kernel that's been fed, is that driving the intensification of New Zealand dairy? So this graph here shows supplementary feed by region. So if we look at the 5 bars on the left, that is the North Island, and you can see palm kernel makes up a significant part of the feed fed to cows. But if we look at the right hand side, those 3 columns are the South Island, and palm kernel is rather low. It's really fodder beet and maize, which is the major contributors. So most of the growth in the dairy industry over the last 25 years has been in the South Island, in Southland and in Canterbury. And they're not big users of palm kernel. Palm kernel seems to be a North Island thing, roughly speaking. So to conclude that palm kernel is what is driving up the growth of the dairy industry, that's probably not true. What we probably could say is that in the North Island, palm kernel is increasing. This is probably in line with the stocking rate data. In 1990, there were 2.3 cows per hectare, and today I think it's 2.8 cows per hectare. So that's a marginal increase. It's not a huge increase, but I think you could probably look at that and you could say palm kernel is used by North Island dairy farmers to increase their stocking rate slightly. The major growth of the dairy industry in the South Island has not really been driven by palm kernel. It's more probably irrigation, and those farmers are feeding fodder beet and maize silage. The happy cow view on palm kernel is we think we should try and avoid it just because it's so controversial. You could make a logical case that palm kernel has been unfairly singled out and vilified when it is no worse than, I guess, any other imported feed. The thing we would say is, why are we importing feed? Every time you import feed, you're actually importing new nutrients. Cows don't absorb all the nutrients they eat. Most of the nutrients will go through and come out as dung and urine. So when you're importing feed, you're increasing the nutrient loading on your land. We think a far better way of doing things is to plant a crop on your farm or on your neighbour's farm and integrating crops in with dairy cows. That's because crops take nutrients out of the ground, cows put nutrients into the ground, and a true regenerative system uses both.